FASCIA, Tensegrity, and Physical Education, the Axis Syllabus Perspective. A review of the Axis Syllabus Research Community Mission, and an overview of up-to-date training principles in the context of pertinent details from the latest biomechanical research. Hi, my name is Frey Faust. I'd like to talk to you today about fascia, or more specifically the implications of this very exciting breakthrough in human biology for training methodology. My contention is that although theoretical understanding of the body has advanced, injuries that have their obvious sources in the way people are conditioned are still epidemic. The groundbreaking information issuing from the research on the fascial superstructure suggests a far-reaching reconsideration of physiotherapeutic and athletic training protocol. However, general practices remain unchanged, indicating a widening discrepancy between what is known and what is actually taught. The motivation to combine scientific discoveries and suggestions from the medical community with empirical know-how led to the consolidation of the Axis Syllabus research community, an international association of scientists, artists, and professional therapists. Our objective is the definition and consolidation of clinically supported, occupationally non-specific approaches to physical education, technical starting points that can serve to cultivate sound reflexes that may lower the risk of injury, raise the potential for longevity, and allow greater force and energy output. The observation of dynamic movement, as well as its back engineering to constituent phases, is a keynote aspect of the Axis Syllabus method. In other words, we are developing ways of instilling coordinations that can be practiced at lower dynamic ranges, but maintain their relevance for higher dynamic states. In the full understanding of how the angles between the bones and joint shapes vary, and how different the soft tissue distribution and tone can be among our students, individuation is considered an essential part of the method as well. So far, we observe that the conditions for optimal tensegrity are provided when alignment is allowed. These two important words deserve a short definition. Tensegrity, or tensional integrity, is an architectural principle present in all organic structures that is based on the use of isolated, semi-rigid components that resist compression inside an elastic, contiguous net of tension. Alignment, or the agreement between communicating structures, is expressed by matched synovial joint surfaces, or balanced voluntary muscular tension, and fascial equilibrium. Alignment is therefore a situation-specific organization of the body that preserves structural integrity and allows for one or more of the following: shock deflection, kinetic energy conservation, enhanced endurance, and risk reduction. I will now place our discussion in context, then I will outline a few proposals for basic training protocols while touching on some of the biomechanical clues that science has provided for our theories. I am a dancer, and although I mostly teach at the moment, I was an active performing artist and choreographer from the 70s to the early 2000s. Among others, I worked with Merce Cunningham, Ohad Nahirin, Meredith Monk, Danny Ezralo, David Parsons, Randy Warshaw, and Stephen Petronio, to name perhaps the most well-known. I was involved in the rendering and performance of at least 40 works authored by others, participated in the founding of 3 companies, and choreographed over 30 works of my own, including solos, duets, and group pieces. A small selection of my efforts can be seen online. As a student and an ambitious member of a highly competitive community, I didn't start to question certain traditions until I got seriously injured. Injury is typical for professional dancers. Major injuries occur in the hips and back, as well as the knees and shoulders. As demonstrated by these statistics gathered by the Advanced Project in 2005, dancers commonly get their first serious injury about 12 years into their careers. That's exactly what happened to me. 12.5 years into my career, my body began to complain. Among other disagreeable events, I lost part of the meniscus for my left knee due to what I feel was inappropriate training. My injuries forced me to study my body and its limitations, and eventually led me to examine those limitations in the larger context of educational practice, human evolution, and biology. Although I'm not an evolutionary scientist, I think it justified to conjecture that our social traditions and individual initiatives interact with the process of natural selection and have a role in determining which traits are retained. Among the most influential might be the ancient social practice of physical education. If I am right, it is in our interest to make sure that our methods are updated as we get a clearer picture of reality, so that inherent mistakes and errors can be corrected for the sake of current and future generations. The understanding of the tensegrity principle and fascia's intimate role in creating tensegrity in our bodies seems profoundly pertinent to this updating process. Let me outline a brief history of how tensegrity came into the public consciousness. The architects, Kenneth Snelson and Buckminster Fuller, were decades ahead of conventional anatomical science in the observation and brilliant application of the tensegrity principle to their constructions. Thanks to these two men, we now know that in order to understand how the body is able to move, muscles, bones, and organs cannot be thought of separately from the rest of the elastic tissues surrounding them. Consider that the passive structures of the spine, the vertebra, joint capsules, and ligaments, can only withstand between 2 and 6 kilos of pressure before collapsing. However, in vivo pressures in the spine can reach 150 kilos. If we based our calculations for how much force the spine can manage on the passive structures alone, we could take one breath and our spines would explode, or bend over and never come back up. A strong indication of the importance of the way fascia creates equilibrium. Just in case you're not aware of what the fascia is, let me recap. The microscopic substructures of the fascia, a collagen-based elastic tissue, are formed of spheres, which are constructed in turn of interlocking triangles. These molecular triangles pack themselves into polyhedron units, which link and interlock in helical formations, building winding strings that bind together to weave fibrous nets, trusses, ropes, pouches, tubes, and bags. As we develop in the primary phases of pregnancy, the fascia is created first and forms the fundamental embryological container and its subdivisions as it wraps, binds, encases, protects, and informs all subsequent structures. Because it is contiguous, it connects these structures to every other structure in the body. The fascia serves as a nest or bridge for the nervous net, and therefore can be considered a sensing instrument, if not an organ. There are many kinds of fascia, sometimes even contract like muscles. One kind of fascia is able to shear off and regroup without injury. Before it was thought that the fascia was unimportant. Now we know it's the most ubiquitous structural element. It's still quite common to view the skeleton as a column, whose main organizational principle is its management and resistance to the Earth's gravitational pull. However, we are now privileged with the knowledge that the skeleton is suspended in a dense net of tensile fibers that are interwoven into complex geometry. The pre-stressed superstructure of the fascia provides continuity, allowing force to be redistributed to the entire system. But fascia is not infallible, as the number of clients for physiotherapy or alternative treatment demonstrate. Although a good portion of mechanically related problems stem from anatomical anomaly or traumatic events and accident, many of the problems afflicting normal people are chronic and find only temporary relief from any medical treatment, allopathic or alternative. Low back pain, a common malaise, offers revealing insight into this discrepancy. According to Dr. Preston H. Long in his 2003 overview on the diagnosis and treatment of back pain, 90% of all registered cases heal themselves with or without treatment within 6 weeks. Working from the data he collected, he summarizes that existing treatments can provide temporary relief, but generally do not shorten this period. The recent discovery that the fascia builds new fibers along the lines of habitually solicited movement pathways offers a troubling perspective. The significance of this discovery is that long-term habits can alter morphology and can exert a powerful, sometimes negative influence on structural harmony. Therefore, in the case of motion-related imbalances, we can surmise that habitual movement patterns have set the body in an imbalanced feedback loop, which includes variations in physical structures, such as muscle size, fascial tone and mass, nervous configuration and density. Once the ephemeral effect of the treatments wear off, the body would predictably fall back into the same disequilibrium as it was before the visit. What is a disadvantageous movement habit? How do these habits arise, and how do we alter them effectively? I think it's reasonable to assume that these questions have answers. Perhaps we're only at the beginning of a truly scientific appraisal. But even at this stage, I think that given what we know, there are some cultural habits and educational traditions that we can view as raising the likelihood of injury. We can currently marshal quite a lot of evidence for the negative consequence of some of these habits or traditions, furnishing the basis of a socially responsible protocol for physical education. We can also already provide some suggestions for their replacement. Data on force generation and absorption suggests that stress-reinforced fascia is stronger and more resistant than bones, and represents a risk to the skeleton if it is not also well educated. Finding parameters for the utilitarian range of motion of joints and stress responses in the bones is therefore a logical place to start when developing criteria for structurally supported decisions. For example, we observe that moderate postural angles allow bones and fascia to align, providing superior resistance, endurance, and energy output. Knowing the latest descriptions of the individual properties of the various physical systems, the way they interrelate, as well as consciously playing with the energy we create while moving is our ultimate objective. The quest for this awareness is what we aspire to engender in our students. Before we discuss Axis Syllabus operating theories, here is a summary overview of the terms I will reference. We call the basic 7 subdivisions of the body motoric masses, because as they turn, translate, or fall towards the floor, they produce and conserve energy. The motoric masses are listed by order of volume. Grouped myofascial layers are better adapted than more bony places to receive and manage the weight of the body as it enters into contact with the floor or other objects. They are also well adapted for takeoff. We call these areas landing or launching pads. The use of the dorsal aspect of the fingers as a landing or launching pad is still controversial. I think it worth mentioning by way of indicating that this system is in flux and subject to constant test driving and updating. Loading zones are those bony areas which can be used to balance on without discomfort or injury, but are not adapted for jumping onto and off from. We term the joints and joint complexes that suggest safe zone range of motion centers. The motion centers are categorized according to their relative degrees of movement freedom, in this case whether they offer triaxial, biaxial, or monoaxial movement range. Although all articular centers are categorized, we generally focus on those that offer 20 degrees or more of movement range. The motion centers all have micro-triaxial movements that are implicit in even the most limited. However, we are referring to relative rotational independence. We are also working with a specific support concept for the hands and feet, based on the understanding that the maintenance of the wide and long arches offer rebound and shock absorption potential. Their preservation lies in the respect for their one-sided bias. In the case of the feet, the lateral bias. In the case of the hand, the medial bias. Both have a lintel, or weight distribution center, which is represented in its first stage by the bones. For the hand, the intersection of the third and fourth metacarpals, the trichotrum, capitatum, and the hamatum. For the foot, the intersection of the third and fourth metatarsals, the last cuneiform, and the ossa cuboid. The term for this support zone is the metatarsal or metacarpal weight distribution center, or metacenter for short. Here are the references we use for safe zone postures and complex movements. Neutral stance, or postural neutrality, is a mid-range, angular relationship where an infinite number of moderate directional choices are made possible. The lateral flexion, or side bend, as it is called in the vernacular, is expressed through a collective, anterolateral triaxial motion that helps to conserve the neutral curves and support value of the spine, while involving the myofascial systems in eccentric contractions that torque and stretch for an energy-efficient tensegrity. Applied side bending is perhaps the most important and ongoing field of research for our team. We have all been astonished at how the side bend applications relieve stress, enhance balance, optimize breathing, raise endurance, and open the possibilities to the student for the execution of movements previously considered out of reach. Hip and shoulder axes indicate external rotation and abduction in more acute flexion phases, and internal rotation and abduction in more acute extension phases. A balanced use of the hip and shoulder axis seems to facilitate a more generalized firing and stretching of surrounding musculature, and therefore could even out the pressure through the joint's synovial surfaces. Based on the range of motion suggested by the hip and shoulder axes, we discourage monoplanar hyperflexion, hyperextension, and hyperrotation for hip and shoulder joints. Instead, we suggest the allowance for and practice of these arcing polyaxial movements that seem implicit in the task of finding and creating support and structurally supported choices of direction. Here is a set of non-colloquial definitions for our various postural relationships to support, which we call spheres, to underline the idea of an area or activity context rather than a position. Sphere 1, support via at least 2 main body masses. Sphere 2, support via 1 main body mass. Sphere 3, support via a distal body part. Sphere 4, support via the hips and or shoulder joints. Sphere 5, support via the arms and legs, grappling a support base above the body's center of mass. Here are some of the relevant properties of the body's mass as it interacts with the physical laws of momentum and the various forces. These are the gravitational forces, centripetal, centrifugal, and Coriolis force. The mechanical forces, shear, torque, lift, impact, compression, and decompression. The properties include inertia, lead and lag, friction, and elastic recoil. We subcategorize inertia, or the resistance to change, into 2 distinct phenomena: static inertia, the resistance to movement, and mobile inertia, the resistance to stillness. Once again, the unaccompanied spine is widely known to be able to manage an insignificant amount of pressure before collapsing. It is no wonder then that chronic lower back pain and serious injury to the spine is so common. The implication is that the movements of the skeleton and its surrounding materials need to respect the limitations of the joints and bones as a basis for structurally supported decisions. This is also why we will first explore articular suggestions for safe range motion in class. Some joints are more insistent, some more suggestive, but each capsular intersection provides lubricated surface areas that are indicative of safe range of motion. Moderate angulation between intersecting bones provides us with our criteria for postural neutrality. Neutral postures can be defined as mid-range stances that allow maximum choice or control of direction. Typically, in neutral postures, capsular ligaments are loosened and myofascial systems are activated in a low-intensity range. The activation of the myofascia places the skeleton under gentle compression, which helps to perceive and maintain alignment. The preservation of moderate angles is a key factor in the maintenance of alignment. Once again, alignment is the practical expression of optimal tensegrity. For example, the neutral curves of the spine. The lumbar and cervical curves develop as a result of 2 postnatal conditions: the weight of the head and pelvic mass that pull the lower spine and neck into lordosis when the baby is lying on its back, and when the baby lifts its head and torso from the prone position and begins to work towards standing up. In other words, the lordosis is a result of our interaction with the environment. The curves arise from the way organic structures develop, often producing spirals, helixes, and sine waves. The basis of nature's energetic or architectural principle, these torquing shapes also correspond to movement forms, or kinetic energy pathways. The phenomenon of externally rotating flexion and internally rotating extension is ubiquitous in the human body, and can be observed in everything from the shapes of the bones to the muscular buildup around them. The externally rotating, inwards drawing spiral represents the direction energy goes as the system loads, and the inwards rotating, externally swinging spiral represents the way energy decants into the environment. Try opposing this spiral as you lift a heavy weight or climb a rope, and you will quickly see and feel how impractical it is. The most pertinent application of alignment protocols is the action of changing levels from lying down to standing and vice versa. Level changes are where we can see how a person will manage transitions and preparations for nearly all other activities: pushing, picking up and carrying external loads, walking, running and jumping, and falling over various distances. In the Axis Syllabus system, we refer to the application of alignment principles to level changes as chronological architecture, and to the specific illustrations as ramps. Ramping provides pertinent ways of stretching and toning muscles in a relevant context. Skilled ramping is obvious in gradual exits and entries across the various levels. Gradation in the use of momentum and muscular force is energy conservative and can reduce stresses on the body. Side-bending mechanics are used in place of simplistic sagittal plane flexions and extensions, allowing optimal tensegrity. Where angle and level changes are observable, asymmetrical weight distribution through available supports is observably more efficient. Asymmetrical dynamic weight distribution makes more complex use of the spine, allowing energy to migrate through the body in waves. Animate organisms function best when effort is sporadic and varied, rather than continuous and monotonous. Variation in the kinds of activity allow renovation as well as providing references for comparison. In practice, this principle is expressed in non-repetitious, polyaxial, alignment-preserving movement patterns and cycles of rest. Knowing that the myofibroblasts build up the fascia along the pathways where the effort is most often requested, we aspire to relay principles rather than ingrained movement habits. This is why there is no set Axis Syllabus vocabulary or set Axis Syllabus exercises. In a given session, an application might be repeated, or it might be re-elaborated, but the net result of a longer-term process is the retention of an archive of transitions rather than sequences. Starting from the establishment of a neutral state, we will work with suspension, resistance, moderation, recoil, undulatory movement, block shapes, sustained effort, and sudden modality changes in order to develop different kinds of strength and discover the way these choices can conserve energy. Adequate breath cycles are an obvious objective criteria of health. Therefore, coordinations that inhibit optimal breathing cannot be considered a viable preparation for vigorous movement. A point just below the navel is generally thought of as the center of gravity or the center of mass, and is also promoted as the center of the body proper. However, since the gravitational center of an object is determined by its shape, the center of gravity must be recalculated for each new situation as it arises. As an anatomical basis for the use of the terms distal and proximal, it seems logical to locate the anatomical center or most proximal zone at the area between the 8th and the 12th thoracic vertebra, which is the intersection of myofascial highways, the organ hub, and the true physical division of the upper and lower body. The knowledge of the various kinds of nerves that populate the fascia has provided more accurate understandings of how information is processed in the body. This understanding has also inspired various methods for stimulating and enhancing that process. For example, interactive touch and body work, tapping and pulling along the skin, deeper pressure into muscle groups, outlining bones through the skin, removing other senses such as eyes or ears to allow the focus to shift to another source, and non-manipulative touch that gives orientation and a sense of proportion. Other methods include the discussion and location of myofascial systems that provide support as they stretch, building anatomy-specific awareness during practical activity, as well as working to remove voluntary reflexes through the partial exclusion of concentric contractions so that structurally inherent movement and deeper layer sensation can be recognized and processed. When I was in Brazil this winter, I had a student who was extremely scoliated. Standing still, you could see that her rib cage and pelvic girdle were much larger on one side. However, in motion, she seemed practically normal. Her doctors want to fuse her lumbar spine with metal. I feel this procedure might cause more problems than it would solve. In the interest of accurate diagnosis and treatment, it seems sensible to witness her in both moving and static states. If my guess is correct, her doctors have only seen her in their office, rolling up and down and standing still. Actually, what this instance demonstrates is the need to do this kind of complete check for everyone, because what is defined as anomaly is in reality the same fractal state of variation for every living person. This means that every person presents different degrees of movement freedom or restriction, as this picture on variation in bone angulation so clearly demonstrates. Claims are often made that it's possible to adequately diagnose and treat structural imbalances from observing static positions. However, given the wide range of activity states, comparing and checking both dynamic and static modes for all postural level to get a complete picture of the individual's toolkit and habits could be useful. The condition of having the bulk of the body's mass suspended in the gravitational field and allowing this mass to fall as a pretext for moving sets the whole system and its function in a specific context. The body is geared to appraise and respond to the loss and recuperation of balance, designed to assess the state of falling in the interest of harnessing the kinetic energy generated by the fall. Kinetic energy must therefore be seen as its primary drive. A convincing argument for this perception of human biomechanics is the fact that eccentric muscular contractions are approximately 40% stronger than concentric contractions, implying that the main function of the muscles is to respond to or guide movement rather than provoke it. The body is mostly made up of an involuntary, spiraling web of tensegritous suspension that generates, regulates, and manages the forces and energies arising from movement, the fascia. We can therefore look to fascia as the most pertinent aspect of our possibilities and potentials. My impression, however, is that the perception of the body and many approaches to educating it exact a willful imposition of aesthetic concepts that compromise a harmonious relationship to the fascia and can actually turn it into the enemy of the skeleton. In the light of current biomechanical science, it appears that several commonly taught coordinations or preparatory exercises are inadequate or potentially dangerous. For example, flattening or inverting the functional curves of the spine, hands, and feet, forcing the heels to the floor and externally rotating the tibia when jumping or stepping backwards, forcing the hip into external rotation and extension, repeating symmetrical, single-plane motions of the spine, arms, and legs until they become reflex, planting the feet flat to the floor and twisting the spine and knees beyond their support value, maintaining constant contractions of the abdominal wall or pelvic floor while moving, not allowing the contralateral compensations of the spine when moving. Why hold positions for lengthy periods with no attention to the transitions from one to the other? Why spend so much time in the gym developing isolated muscle strength through repetitious monoaxial motions? And if the support of ligaments are needed for dynamic thrust and joint stability, why practice stretching regimes that target these structures for laxity? As Paul Chek has pointed out, preparatory exercises need to be similar to the activity we have in mind in order to be useful. The study of the way our entire system copes with movement naturally is therefore of extreme importance. And as Serge Garkovetsky said, since moving is what we do principally, and because our design is so obviously derived from the dynamic state, Movement should be our principal study. I wholeheartedly agree. Given the risks that performing artists and athletes take, there is no guarantee, but nevertheless I'm positive that it's possible to enhance performance while safeguarding one's health. In the very near future, I believe that the expansion of athletic skill sets will be prepared for by an education in human biomechanics. Understanding and applying the knowledge of the amazing properties of fascia brings that someday closer to now.